Bueno, lamentamos este pequeño retraso, haberles tenido un poquito esperando, pero bueno, pues ha tenido que ser así, no hemos podido comenzar antes, pero les doy las gracias por estar aquí, por acompañarnos en esta conferencia extraordinaria que el área de educación y el Museo del Prado ha organizado en colaboración con la Fundación Sorigué, porque nos pareció que era una ocasión especial, que era una ocasión que debíamos resaltar, que debíamos incluir entre nuestras actividades, el hecho de poder tener aquí a un artista actual, a un artista contemporáneo, a un artista que está exponiendo al lado del museo, en el Jardín Botánico. Es la primera vez que expone en Madrid y bueno, pues que su visita a nuestra ciudad con motivo de la exposición teníamos que aprovecharlo para que en este año del bicentenario que estamos rememorando y resaltando a todos esos artistas que hicieron del Prado pues, un lugar especial para poder después desarrollar su carrera pictórica. En este caso, bueno, pues tenemos la suerte de contar con nosotros con Mat Collishaw, que hará este diálogo en torno a las obras maestras, bueno, en torno a su producción relacionada con el Museo del Prado, que bueno, pues compartirá ese diálogo con el crítico de arte Waldemar Januszczak. Seguramente no lo he dicho bien, pero estoy convencida que me perdonará. Y bueno, pues resumiendo un poco la trayectoria de Mat Collishaw que tenemos hoy aquí, él vive y trabaja en Londres, es graduado por el Goldsmith College en 1989, formó parte de una importante generación de jóvenes artistas británicos contemporáneos conocidos como Young British Artists, donde se convirtió en una figura clave junto con otros artistas como Damien Hirst y Sarah Lucas. Participó en Frieze en 1988 y desde su primera exposición individual en 1990 ha realizado numerosas exposiciones internacionales. Su extensa producción aúna pintura, fotografía, vídeo e instalaciones, utilizando una combinación de diferentes técnicas y elementos tecnológicos para crear su arte. Una de las cosas que más nos llamó la atención es que en 1997 viajó desde Londres hasta Madrid con los ojos vendados. Fue un proyecto que denominó Blind Date. Y bueno, pues tras ese trayecto hasta Madrid con los ojos vendados, contempló Las Meninas, esa obra, ese buque insignia de nuestro Museo del Prado. Tras esos 3 minutos volvió a vendarse los ojos y retornó a Londres para continuar, tras esa experiencia, desarrollando su carrera. 20 años más tarde regresa a Madrid con esa exposición que tienen, ya digo, en el Jardín Botánico, donde recoge algunas de las pinturas más emblemáticas del museo, algunas de nuestras obras maestras. También se basa mucho en los bodegones, en torno a los que reflexiona para hacer imágenes contemporáneas. Y bueno, pues estamos encantados de que hayamos podido organizar esto en colaboración con la Fundación Sorigué. Tenemos a Ana Vallés, que es la presidenta del grupo Sorigué y de la Fundación Sorigué, que la invito a que venga para decirnos unas palabras antes de empezar con el diálogo que vamos a tener hoy. Gracias por su asistencia, espero que disfruten y que continúen amando el Museo del Prado. Gracias.
Gracias, Paloma. Muchísimas gracias a todos ustedes por atender esta conferencia coloquio. También a la Fundación Museo del Prado y al Museo del Prado por esta extraordinaria posibilidad de presentar a uno de los artistas más importantes que tenemos en nuestra colección. Como ha comentado Paloma, este diálogo se enmarca dentro del bicentenario del Museo Nacional del Prado, pero también dentro de la primera propuesta que la Fundación Privada Sorigué realiza en Madrid. La Fundación Sorigué es una institución que nace en el año 85 en Lérida, con un objetivo muy claro, que es la aportación y la devolución social del Grupo Sorigué. Tenemos 3 aspectos que nos preocupan: el apoyo a nuestra sociedad cercana, lo hacemos a través de un centro para discapacitados intelectuales. Hoy estamos dando soporte a más de 40 familias. También el retorno hacia la parte pedagógica. Desarrollamos una serie de becas de estudio para aquellas personas que tienen talento y que, sin embargo, por circunstancias personales o incluso sociales no lo pueden desarrollar. Y la tercera faceta es la cultural, es la construcción desde el año 2000 de una colección de arte contemporáneo. Esta colección hoy cuenta con más de 450 obras de artistas internacionales, artistas de la talla de Antonio López, de Tapies, de José María Sicilia, Barceló, Amsel Kiefer o Doris Salcedo. Es una colección que además tiene un propósito. Nosotros creemos que el arte es transformador, que el arte nos ayuda a mejorar nuestra sociedad y por ello queremos compartir esta colección a través de exposiciones temporales. Hemos hecho 4 exposiciones en nuestra sede de Lérida. La primera fue un diálogo de las obras en estudio de Antonio López con nuestra propia colección. La segunda exposición se hizo a través del videoartista, el cineartista Wim Wenders, con el cual nos ha unido una relación muy estrecha. De hecho, está haciendo un proyecto ahora para la Fundación Sorigué. La tercera exposición ha sido Shiharu Shiota, una instalación, y recientemente en Lleida hemos cerrado una exposición de Óscar Muñoz, uno de los artistas más significativos relacionados con el vídeo. De hecho, hizo durante nuestra exposición, ganó el premio Hasselblad a la fotografía. Hoy inauguramos esta semana pasada a Mat Collishaw, la 5ª exposición temporal que se abre aquí en Madrid, con la voluntad de aproximar la Fundación a nuestros centros de trabajo, apoyar el trabajo que está haciendo nuestros profesionales aquí en esta ciudad. Mat Collishaw, como comentaba Paloma, es uno de los artistas fundamentales en el panorama internacional, un artista tremendamente inteligente, muy crítico, pero al mismo tiempo muy honesto y con gran generosidad. Es un artista que les invito a conocer en el Jardín Botánico, está abierto hasta el día 29. Además, siguiendo con la voluntad de la Fundación de aproximar, como decía, el arte a todos los públicos, tenemos una serie de acciones encaminadas a aproximar a las 1.600 personas que pueden acceder a unas entradas que tenemos en nuestra página web, así como los fines de semana talleres para familias. ¿Por qué Dialogues? ¿Por qué Mat? Precisamente porque abre una serie de diálogos que para nosotros son muy importantes. El primero lo establece entre su obra, la naturaleza y el jardín botánico, una fuente de inspiración extraordinaria, la naturaleza para él. El segundo diálogo, como ha comentado Paloma, lo establece entre su inspiración con la historia del arte, el Museo Nacional del Prado y su obra. Y el tercer diálogo es el que establece Mat con nuestro propio proyecto Planta. Finalmente, solo quiero compartir con vosotros y dar las gracias a Waldemar Januszczak. Es crítico de arte, es una persona tremendamente reconocida en el mundo de la crítica. Ha ganado durante 2 años consecutivos el premio a la crítica en Gran Bretaña. Creo que van a establecer un diálogo extraordinariamente interesante que nos va a aproximar también a la obra de Mat Collishaw. Y espero que a partir de ahí tengan ustedes el interés de conocer la obra de Mat en el Real Jardín Botánico. Muchísimas gracias y gracias también al Museo Nacional del Prado por esta oportunidad. Gracias.
Thank you so much. It's so good of you to mention the 2 awards I won for Critic of the Year. That cheers me up. I'm so sorry to be speaking in English. Unfortunately, yo no habla español, so I hope that you understand most of what we're going to be saying. I know I speak for Mat when I say it's a great honor to be here, as well as a great pleasure. Any kind of association with the Prado Museum, with the Fundació Sorigué, these are things that give us a great excitement in Britain, particularly at the moment when we are having our existential crisis about our own identity. So Mat and I, we're like ambassadors for our international outlook. So thank you so much for inviting us. Has everybody seen the exhibition here? Put your hands in the air if you've seen the exhibition. Okay, so the people who seen the exhibition, you know what an amazing exhibition it is. Really interesting, really exciting, and really contemporary, but also so interestingly involved with the past, with the world of old masters. A perfect exhibition for a relationship between the Prado, the Fundació Sorigué, and British art. Those of you who have not seen the exhibition, I beg you, you must go. Please go tomorrow morning. It's a really exciting experience for you. There's nothing better you could do tomorrow than to go and see Mat Collishaw's Dialogues in the Botanical Garden. So, sorry, I'm talking too much already. It's a problem I have. But the exhibition is called Dialogues. And I imagine, Mat, that that's because you have two things going on here, really. One part of the exhibition is interested in nature, issues of nature. The other part of the exhibition is more about old masters. Is that the dialogue that you're trying to prompt us to understand and feel?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I think there's two dialogues, or there are several dialogues going on, but there's a dialogue between the side of the exhibition which references nature, which also hopefully resonates with the botanical gardens, and then there's the side of the exhibition which deals with ideas and imagery from art history, which obviously references the collection here of the Prado. And this was an idea that came about talking to Anna Valles at the Sorigué Foundation of how we're going to present this, and it seemed to make sense to split it into these two different sections. I didn't really make work specifically for particular places. I make works generally because I have an idea, but then if the opportunity comes up to present them in a certain place and I can use that context to help make the work resonate a little bit more, then that's something that I'm very keen on doing. Because a lot of the works that I make, essentially, it's just kind of about framing things, and it's about if you present things in a certain way, they look, or you'll emotionally be impacted them on them in a particular way. For example, the works that I make, the Las Meninas on Death Row works, you get, like, for example, a picture of a hamburger or a lemon, but because of the way that that food is lit and the way it's photographed and the way it's framed, makes you think about the tradition of the vanitas portrait, these 17th century still life portraits. So you're looking at a cheeseburger in a different way that you might look at it in a McDonald's advert. So the framing is always key in the work that I make. So to be able to put one section of these works in the Botanical Gardens and another section right next to the Prado Museum, it helps set up this kind of network of connections, which subconsciously I think you'll be making as you walk around the exhibition.
So those who haven't seen the show, perhaps just quickly to say that you walk in and on the right-hand side is a selection of works by Mat that are to do with nature, issues of ecology, issues of how we are spoiling the modern world. And on the other side, there are some works that are to do with the past, with old masters, with the great works in the Prado. And these two groups inside the show are having a kind of dialogue between themselves. Because in a way, art and nature, they're similar anyway, aren't they? They share so much in terms of their importance to us as human beings. Would you agree with that, Mat?
I would, and I also think there are things that occur in nature which are used in art, and things that we copy, possibly unconsciously, from nature, certain traits that occur, which I find fascinating, and for me are like a big part of my interest in the world generally, but specifically in the art that I make about it. For example, you have things like beauty that occurs in nature, in flowers specifically, And this is something that we celebrate by cutting flowers and putting them in vases, or taking photographs of them and putting them on greeting cards. And there's this kind of like cosmetification going on of this beautiful, beautiful aspect of nature. But it's also interesting that the reason those flowers look like they do, their shape and their color and their perfume, is not there just to please our eye. It's there because these flowers are these predatory breeding machines, and they're interested in propagating their species, so they will create this design that's dynamic enough to attract an insect or a bird, which will come in to get the nectar, inadvertently pick up the pollen and spread it. So these little kind of breeding machines, these flowers have an ulterior agenda, and the beauty that they use is just a means for getting what they want, which is ultimately quite selfish. And that deceit and artifice that occurs within the natural world is obviously something that artists also pick up on and use. You know, the whole thing is about getting coloured dirt, putting it on a kind of a stretched piece of cloth and making you believe that something that's not there actually is there. And this game of illusions begin, this artifice and this deceit.
You see, most people here, when they go out and buy some flowers, we buy them because they're beautiful and they cheer us up and they seem like something that can decorate the house. But hearing you talk about them, you make them sound so dark and almost sinister. There's two things going on there.
Yeah, well, it's from thinking about them like that really thrills me. Because it's sinister. It's like that thrill you have in Gothic horror, which is what the whole Gothic thing is about, right? It's that you actually enjoy the fact that something is chilling you to the bone. So, of course, I enjoy flowers for their physical beauty too. But then when I suddenly start kind of snooping around behind the scenes, trying to find out why things happen the way they do, and then something like this occurs to me, as something that really excites me.
Now, one of the largest pieces in the natural section, the nature section, is a group of glass boxes inside which you have models of beautiful flowers. At least when you first look at them, you think they're beautiful flowers. And when you investigate more closely, you lean in and you look, and you see that they're growing in these terrible places with mud and silage, and there's all sort of rubbish there. And there's a kind of English expression about finding an orchid on a rubbish tip, where somewhere horrible can produce something very beautiful. Are those works about that, or are they just about the ecology and how we're spoiling the world?
I was thinking that if some people say that like nature is a barometer of the health of the planet, and if it is, then going on these flowers, our planet is sick. So I wanted to make something about that, and also this idea that these flowers, plants, that they're kind of like animals in a way. It's just that they don't move or have such a connection to us in the way we behave, that we kind of remove them really and treat them as something that's very remote from us. But if you kind of you have like a time-lapse film of a plant growing, suddenly it becomes very animal-like and really kind of weird and spookily alive. And so I wanted to make these flowers more animal in a way, to take them away from being cosmetified the way that we have them on photographs on greetings card. And so I started taking like diseases, specifically sexual diseases like syphilis and gonorrhea, and putting those on the flowers there. So they were suffering from these kind of very human diseases of the flesh on the petals of the flowers. And it was also referencing certain French writing that I was reading at the time, the Fleur de Mal of Baudelaire, where he's kind of he celebrates and enjoys the poetry of the night, of things that happen in the darkness and things that might not be too healthy, like physically and also morally healthy. And I think he enjoys and finds this darkness quite exquisite. And this was like a kind of a new way of looking at the world, that you could embrace this slightly sinister side of mental sickness. And there's another French writer, J.K. Heisman, who wrote a book called Against Nature.
Arabor,
a very famous book about a wealthy collector's descent into kind of obsession and madness, and he's collecting stranger and stranger materials, and he gets to a point where he's collecting exotic flowers, and these flowers appear to have diseases on them. And I think like his obsession with the things he's collecting mirrors his descent into this psychosis as he removes himself from the real world. And then also there was the books of Jean Genet that I was reading, and he was in prison, and he would write about his lovers in prison, and he'd talk about them. They would have like sores and wounds on their body, but rather than being repulsed by this, he would talk about them as being embellishments of their body, and he'd talk about their sensuality as though these were medals that these men had won in their battles in life, and for him they were embroidered with these beautiful monuments to their achievement. Very perverse way of looking at something that is usually repulsive. So that was also part of it, trying to get something that you're normally kind of repelled by, and to try and turn it around, and to take that kind of normal template you have for thinking about things and the normal morality you have, and just look at it in a different way.
There's a Marquis de Sade, as it were.
Another guy who kind of celebrated the lacerations of the flesh. Yeah.
There's another very charming piece in the nature section of a canary in a kind of glass bowl, which I think I'm right in saying was inspired by a British artist called Joseph Wright of Derby.
Yes.
Is that right? Can you tell us about that? It's a beautiful little piece, not as ambitious as some of them, but very telling.
Yeah. The painting by Joseph Wright of Derby depicts an experiment which happened a couple of 100 years ago, and it is to understand whether we need oxygen to breathe. So they would put a little bird, a canary, inside a vacuum, inside a glass jar, and then pump the air out of it so you got a vacuum, and then watch the bird slowly die. And in the painting he's depicted these men of science who are all looking at this little bird inside the glass jar in a very dispassionate way. They're interested in empirical knowledge and science and what happens when you take the oxygen out. And then there are some little girls in the scene, and they're watching this little bird dying, and they're moved and they're crying by it. So you have this whole spectrum of responses going on to this little scenario that's being played out. And for me, that's kind of not dissimilar to what happens in many different fields, such as just like something that you're watching in TV, or maybe like a gladiatorial combat or a bullfight. It's scenarios, and some people have a more detached relationship to it, some people are more emotionally moved, but it's within this forum that that sometimes cruelty emerges in entertainment or science, and people's reaction to it demonstrates our humanity, and exactly like where our empathy is, and where our kind of will and lust for knowledge kind of takes us away from that. I mean, it's also like a little bit like an old TV, like a cathode ray tube, which was like this vacuum in which you'd fire and get an image from. So it kind of references the old TV as well. So it's essentially this little canary hopping around, and you come and you see it in the gallery, and it's kind of cute and sweet to watch. But then it's a little kind of painful, and then you walk away and you know that this little bird's destined not to leave that place. He's condemned to be hopping around forever in there. And I quite like the idea of making an artwork like that, that the actual presence of it is something that you feel this like kind of almost like pain towards when you're leaving it. Like leaving a dog tied to a tree or something.
And of course they used to use canaries in mines, didn't they? They took them underground, and if the canary died, you knew that the air was poisonous.
So the canary is always like a warning that something is wrong. So it has this symbolic value to it.
Yeah.
Something is awry.
You're obviously interested in science. A lot of the works that you make are very ambitious technically. You do things that no one else would even think about doing. But it's an interesting mixture of science that seems to inspire you, because although a lot of it is cutting edge, absolutely digital and today, there's an atmosphere of, I mentioned Joseph Wright of Derby's experiment, but there's a sort of atmosphere of crazy experiments as well, slightly 18th century, like a sort of mad old alchemist sitting in a study doing strange things. Is that an unfair thing to say about you?
I think it's something that is not a move that I've made intentionally, and if I did, I really would be crazy, because a lot of the works in here are very challenging. The installation of this exhibition wasn't easy, and Sorigué have done a fantastic job, because there are things that are very difficult to calibrate and get right. So a lot of these work, there's a lot of late nights thinking, I forgot about this and it's not going to work, and like, you have to really kind of push through and get over a lot of obstacles to actually make them come to life. But because I was, I think, always interested in imagery, and strangely the animated image, and I grew up in a house that didn't have a TV. My parents thought it was a potentially malign presence in the home, that I was particularly fascinated by this idea of the television. So when I was on my newspaper round as a kid, I'd be looking through my neighbours' windows, watching the TV, and just be absolutely enchanted by this little animated image in the corner of people's room. So then I would try to make the same thing with like little cereal boxes, little theatre, in the way that a lot of kids do, and just to try and create little animations and little stop motion films with Super 8 projectors, that kind of thing. So just really desperately trying to animate things was something that I grew up doing, and I think it's just probably just become exaggerated in the sculptures, because now it's kind of like my job to make artwork, so animation creeps in there and it becomes a little excessive at times.
I was going to talk about your upbringing later in the section about the old masters, but since you mention it, I think we could just have a little word about it now, because you had a really interesting childhood. You mentioned that you didn't see any TV, and that's because your parents were members of an interesting and perhaps rather strange religious cult, weren't they? Can you tell us about that?
Like a sect.
Sect.
I don't think they like the idea of cult. Yeah, so they it's like a kind of Protestant religion, but they don't really like going to church or anything that has like an iconic value to it. For example, the crucifix would be considered to be
a graven image.
Exactly, yeah. As would the church and many of the other things, and also the hierarchy of the church was something very different to many other churches. And everything had like a moral weight to it. So the TV was considered something that was illicit and potentially dangerous and corrupting, and other things such as fashion magazines or whatever, they were things that could possibly corrupt you, which is, I think, as a kid growing up, means you're ultimately drawn to them a lot more. It's like, wow, this thing has the power to do that. That's amazing. I want to know more about it. But also, I think for a lot of the works that I make, it's come out in like the little moral quandaries that I experience in life when I'm walking down the street or watching TV or whatever. They trouble me, they disturb me, and violence and abuse of power and cruelty, these things like touch me deeply, and I want to make work about them. I want to say, look, how do you feel about this? And why is it that we're even looking at it? Why is it that we're fascinated by watching films with violence in and video games that have these violent elements, if we're kind of moved to try and help in situations when violence and cruelty does erupt? So what is that thing, and why do we enjoy it as entertainment but are upset by it when it happens in real life? And I think those things all come from this upbringing I had, where everything, you think about everything you did because there would be a consequence for it, and it was very real to me as a kid growing up.
But it also meant that you had a familiarity with religious imagery, with religious notions, with the Bible, that perhaps many people growing up in your generation no longer have. And of course that helps you in this exhibition, because so much old master art is to do with that. But also, I guess the morality of the Bible is what you're talking about. This idea that good and bad are at work in the modern world, and the artist's job is to be on the side of good. Is that right?
I think I'm very lucky. I'm quite old anyway, but from my generation, I think it was like I was living in 2 generations back, because there's certain things they didn't want in the home, and the ideas that they had perhaps may seem to have been not of the modern world. So I was lucky enough that I had feet in both worlds, in the kind of like Second World War kind of period, and then in the modern world when technology is evolving very quickly and everybody's got these little gadgets. But I'm still like living with images from the Bible, so which is the language which we've been sharing for hundreds of years. But suddenly over the last few decades, like attendance to churches and reading the Bible, it's really dropped off significantly. So that old world is kind of being lost in a way. For me, it's still present.
I think we'll go on and mention some more Bible stuff. Sorry if it's anything that you're not interested in, but I think it's so important for Mat's work and for the Prado and its collection of our masters. But just to finish with the nature first, the biggest piece, I suppose, in the nature section of the exhibition is a huge oak tree, which I believe is modelled on an oak tree from Nottingham. You come from Nottingham. Yeah. Everybody knows Nottingham for one reason. Who came from Nottingham? Robin Hood. Robin Hood came from Nottingham, and everybody knows the forest of Sherwood Forest. And inside Sherwood Forest are some of the oldest trees in Britain. That's right, isn't it? Old oak trees. And you've made these the subject of one of your most ambitious pieces. Perhaps you could tell us about that. It's called Albion.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we lost most of our oak trees 500 years ago when we built the ships for the Armada. So there were very, very few left.
That's our battle with Spain, was it?
Yes. So there were very few left of that kind of age. The oak tree that I laser scanned is a tree that allegedly Robin Hood used to hide in with his merry men, and because of its like mythological significance and because of the tourist industry, they really want to preserve this thing. But it is very old and it looks like it just wants to die. So it's currently propped up by lots of metal rods, and then there is chains inside, which makes the whole scene look a little bit sadomasochistic and also very sad. It looks like it wants to die with some dignity, but we just won't let it. I laser scan this tree so you get like basically a file with all the data captured and nothing else from the surrounding area. And it's just like a very cold, emotionally detached way of creating an image or a film, because it's all about like firing this little kind of light, hits the surface, comes back, makes a reading and moves on. So it's this cold process of capturing this thing, which I've then rotated, so the tree's slowly rotating 360 degrees, and I've presented it in the style of Pepper's Ghost optical illusion, which was a popular means of entertaining people in the theatres in the 19th century. It's very lo-fi. So it's a combination of very modern technology with quite primitive technology. And at the time that I was making this work was the referendum and the whole talk about England and what it meant to be English.
The Brexit referendum.
Yeah, and there was the whole kind of, the slogan for the Brexit campaign was take back control, and the idea that we kind of lost control and we'd lost our sovereignty, and this is why England wasn't perhaps as we want it to be now. And so the whole idea was going back to a golden age of England, Albion, this time when everything was rosy, when everybody had employment, there was no immigration, and everything worked the way we wanted it to. And there was this myth being sold to the people of nostalgia of old England, the oak tree being a symbol of England, and they're trying to keep this idea of oldie England alive and sell it to people. So the portrait I've got is this decrepit old tree that people are desperately trying to keep alive. But if you walk around the other side, you see that it's not actually there, because what I've got is an optical illusion. And the illusion of England, or the illusion of my tree, is dependent on all this paraphernalia. It's dependent on all these fancy words and the stories and the myths that are being sold to people about when England was great. But it's an illusion that's just dependent on, it's a construct.
So that was deliberately made as an artwork in reaction to the Brexit moment, was it?
Yeah, but it was also with another work that I'd made about like evolutionary behavioralism. So I was trying to make something about the exhibition was called the Centrifugal Soul, and it was based about how we now project too much of ourselves to our exterior, and that we've always done this, and Birds of Paradise do it, the men show off to the women by having very colourful, dynamic plumage, and the men are still doing it nowadays with their Rolexes and their SUVs and the kind of fancy lifestyles, but now through things like social media, it's becoming exacerbated, and on Instagram and Twitter, we're just projecting everything onto the exterior, and there is this empty core in our centre where qualities like dignity and reticence used to be. So this was how I started thinking about it, and then the Brexit thing came in, and I started trying to co-opt that.
I see. So the idea that this old tree, one of the oldest trees in Britain, is actually hollow, but it looks big from the outside, but inside there's nothing there. That's that idea. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
And Albion was, of course, the original name for Britain. Is that right?
Yes.
For England.
Yeah. Like this mythical country from the past. Yeah.
Well, so the nature part of this exhibition really features, I think, your scientific interests, your interests in the darkness of nature. But then when you walk across the hall to the other side of the show, we're moving now into the world of old masters and the relationship with the Prado. And I'd like to say that it's a very different world, but actually it isn't. I found a lot of parallels between the two sections of the show. It's as if, just as nature only lasts for so long and it's constantly threatened, you could say that art has the same issues, that it's art too is a vanitas. It's something that, like, we enjoy having cut flowers in our room, but actually they don't mean anything. We enjoy having all these beautiful paintings at the Prado, but so many of the paintings are about how short life is and how quickly it passes. Are those conscious thoughts for you as well, or is it just me?
Well, I mean, they're still there. They're still hanging up here. They've lasted hundreds of years, and it's kind of fascinating as to why some of these images last and some don't, and how time is frozen inside this image, and they've trapped a moment in there which we're still looking at hundreds of years later. I enjoy the kind of parameters that some of these painters had to work in. They don't really have the freedom that we do nowadays, and I think in a way we've lost something from our gain, in that they had to, like, for example, you'd be making paintings which illustrated certain religious themes or mythological themes, or painting a king and queen or somebody of importance, and then if you had to, like, kind of, if you wanted to say something yourself, you'd have to kind of sneak it in under the radar, so you'd have to be quite inventive. And they were also dealing with, you know, mediums which are, you got to freeze it in that one moment. They didn't have things that happened over time, videos or anything like that. So they're working with a lot more restraints than we did, and I find that kind of focus that you get in these old master paintings really compelling, and then the fact that beneath that initial layer of the fact that it's a portrait of a king or something, and then there's other stuff going on in there. They had to hide certain things that we then later and still are deciphering, and something that you do in your day job quite a lot, looking at something that we're quite familiar with and we think we've known for 100 years, but saying, hang on a minute, what about this? And trying to peel back these layers and find other things underneath. So these painters find ways of making something which is relatively simple in a way. It's a two-dimensional image on the wall, but is endlessly fascinating, and that's really quite an achievement, and one of the reasons that I keep coming back to these images.
And full of symbolism, usually. So are you a haunter of museums? I mean, when you go, do you do a lot of that? Do you go to a lot of collections and look at old master art?
Yeah, I do, and it's one of life's greatest pleasures for me, I think. I mean, I try not to do, like, too much. So if I go into a museum, you look kind of 3 or 4 things, and then out there again. And living in a city like Madrid, then you just have this, like, kind of abundance of places where you can do that. And in London, like, just popping into the National Gallery, taking a short for a go from Trafalgar Square to Orange Street, you can just see like several masterpieces on the way. But sometimes I think that, you know, the museums can get in the way a little bit because of the grandiosity of the whole marble-lined facade and the interior and the scale of it all, and then the gilt frames, and then the painting, which is iconic, and you know the painter, and you know that you're supposed to revere him. And all of those things can sometimes get in the way of the fact that you're looking at the raising of Lazarus, which is, you know, this little kind of humble event that happens in the New Testament, and it's kind of grubby and dirty. You know, the whole grandiosity of the museum system gets in the way sometimes. And I made this work, did we talk about this work before? I made this work where I came to the Prado wearing a blindfold.
So tell us about that, because I know about it, but we haven't talked about it, yes.
So it's very amazing to be back here doing a talk 20 years after I made this work. I put a blindfold on in my studio in London, and then I flew blindfold to Madrid. I came to Las Meninas. I took the blindfold off and looked at this painting for 3 minutes, and I put it back on again and flew back to London. And that painting is like a good example of what I'm talking about. That, you know, when you initially approach it, it looks quite underwhelming in a way, and then you suddenly realize that you're caught inside this trap that is created, and you become like a hostage to the painting. You're kidnapped inside of it. You're co-opted by the fact that he's located you in the image. So this trip was part of that, this kind of pilgrimage to see this great painting, but also being a hostage to a visual image, and also not having to go through all that rigmarole of seeing all the other visual pollution and stimulation along the way. So it was just like, that was what I saw, and then I was back again, and that was it.
Yeah, it's a good way to do a trip, to go all that way for one picture.
Yeah, I wouldn't advise it.
Expensive.
Well, as soon as you don't have like lose one sense, the other senses really get exaggerated.
But also you miss out on so much. When you come to the Prado, the Zurbarans, the Cotans,
yeah.
I mean, you know.
They were all behind me. Yeah.
Do you have a particular taste for Spanish art?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I don't think we've really got an equivalent of in England, which is another reason for being drawn to it more strongly. Your Ribieras and Velázquez and Goyas, this dark sensuality which permeates these paintings. What have we got in England really like that? I mean, we have satire with Hogarth, and there are painters that I like, but and the Caravaggio, who's in Naples, which was Spanish, I think, at the time. So the Italian and the Spanish bleeding. And that kind of sensuality and the darkness of the Baroque.
Well, of course, it's Catholic, you know, I mean, this is the big difference between England and Spain, you know. Protestant.
And they love the image, yeah.
It's a different thing. Yeah, and of course, the Prado, a lot of the collection in the Prado used to be in England. I mean, everybody knows that Charles I was a great collector of Titian. And then when we had our first madness in Britain, at the moment we're having our second madness, Brexit. The first madness was in 1648, when we killed the king, cut his head off. And then Cromwell sold all the paintings, and the Prado bought some of the best ones. And because of that, they're here now, they're in the Royal Collection. So this is like, you profited from the first madness, you probably profit from the second madness as well. And we're all profiting because it's made Mat Collishaw do his fantastic exhibition at the Sorigué Foundation. Sorry, I'm talking too much now. But there's a piece that I think here is really worth talking about in that show about the old masters, which really relates to Spanish still life painting. You know, Zurbarán, Cotan, and those are the pieces about the last meal. Can you tell us about that? Because I think they're amongst your most important pieces.
Yeah, so they're basically depictions. I've restaged images, I've made images of people's choices for their last meal on death row before they're executed. Usually in America, there's a couple of exceptions. And I'd seen some pictures like these in the Sunday Times magazine like 25 years ago, but they were like taken from above, and they were like very colourful and very garish with the flash. But somehow this red plastic tray with chicken nuggets and a milkshake on the side, they had like a poignancy to them. It was like, Christ, I'd love to do something with these, but I can't really think what to do because I'm quite slow.
So these were like the last
years.
meals that the prisoners would eat before they were killed?
Yeah, yeah.
So you get a choice of what you want?
Yeah, different states in America have different rules. Some people will send out if you want sushi. Other states, you have to have what they got in the kitchen that day. Depends how generous they're feeling. Anyway, there's something very chilling about the fact that a civilized veneer is put on this barbaric act of murder, essentially, that you're going to kill somebody, but we will kind of just allude to that idea that we're all going to do it in a very civilized fashion. We're going to ask you what you want to eat, and then we're going to serve it up, and then lethal injection or electric chair hands. There's something very, really cold and chilling about that supposedly civilized act. And so I just started researching lots of prisoners and built up a little dossier of hundreds of last meal on death rows, cross-referenced them to make sure the information was accurate, and then chose a series that had like a good range from somebody who just chose a communion, like a glass with a wafer, to somebody who chose a whole banquet, and then restaged them as these 17th century still life paintings, Spanish or Dutch particularly. And so that now you're looking at a picture of some chicken wings with a sprite, but instead of looking at them in the way you normally would, you're thinking about those issues of the mental mori or the vanitas, the kind of the meaningless accumulation of worldly goods and the transience of life and mortality, and they become like these surrogate portraits of these prisoners that were executed.
And of course it's got a biblical reference too, because the whole idea of a Last Supper has our redemption ideas.
Yeah, so I made them in a series of 13, so it was like 12 apostles in Judas, right? Yeah. So that was, yes, 13 in the series, yeah.
I remember I made a film about Baroque art once, and we were filming in Peru, in the cathedral in Lima. They've got a lot of Last Suppers. And what was really funny was that instead of normally there's a lamb in the middle of the table, but in Peru they've got guinea pig. So it's like little roast guinea pig that everybody's gathered around.
Does it have the same spiritual weight?
No, and they've also got funny little teeth, so it sort of stares at you from the plate like that.
I'd love to see some of those.
It loses a lot of its poignancy.
Yeah, and its sacred power, which is something that I wanted to get in these pictures here, which is something I don't see a lot in art galleries, but the idea that you can just have like a cheeseburger and give it some kind of sacred presence to it, to give it that gravitas because of what it symbolizes in this particular instance.
Yeah, and the way you made those images, which do look so much, certainly when you first see them, like 17th century Spanish bodegons or still lifes, I mean, that gives it that feeling of a kind of religious power, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things that I didn't choose when I made my kind of list of meals to recreate, and I didn't choose any with lemons in. Do you have anything? Do you know anything about the appearance of lemon in still life painting?
I did a lot of research on lemons in still lives once for another film I was making. You know, a lot of Dutch still lives in particular have a lemon, and sometimes the lemon peel is just pulled off it. Have you seen those?
Yeah.
But it's because lemons were incredibly expensive in the 17th century, because obviously they didn't grow in Holland, they didn't grow in places like that, they grew in hot places. So when you imported a lemon, it was quite a big deal, you know, it was an expensive gift. And lemons, the thing about lemons is that they stay beautiful and look incredibly nice for months. So you can take a lemon and it won't go mouldy quickly, it'll look beautiful. But as soon as you cut it, it starts to decompose and go bad. So it became a kind of religious metaphor for life, really. I mean, it looks beautiful, but any moment now it could finish. So it has that vanitas meaning of life is an earthly pleasure, but very soon it disappears. All those lemons in the still lives have that specific meaning. And like so many vanitas subjects, like art, you know, there's so many vanitas paintings where you'll see a painting or a musical instrument, and all these pleasures that we have in life, they're all part of the same story. While we're alive on earth, they give us pleasure, but you know, unless we believe in the one true God, there's nothing beyond our daily lives, beyond our eternal existence.
I assume it would also be a challenge for the artist to then paint that lemon in the time that he had, which was probably 24 hours before it started to all congeal. So a bit of a test and a way of showing off. But I appreciate the point. And the other work, like the chandelier work that I have in the exhibition here, although it may not appear to be part of this subject, was something from the book of Ecclesiastes, which is, I think, where vanity, vanity, all is vanities comes from. And it's about the fact that, you know, we are all going to get old, and our grinders, our teeth are going to stop working, and the windows will go dark, the eyes will stop to see, and eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. So this idea of this kind of desperate party before death was something that I tried to reference in my chandelier work.
But when you started out, you were famously part of a group called the Young British Artists. And now you're an old British artist, and I'm a very old British critic.
Yeah,
so
the clock is ticking for all of us. Yeah, Fantastic becomes more pertinent.
To go back to the other old masters that you referenced there, there's another series which is, you see bits of image. I think they're called the Extinction Pictures, is that right? There's a bit of an image, and I recognise some of them, but you don't see a lot of it because it's as if they haven't been... Oh, there we are, sorry, there's one behind us. Tell us about those, because they are obviously also dependent on you having some sense of what the image is, but they're mostly about what you can't see.
Yeah, so they kind of eroticises them in a way. They came about, like a lot of the things that I do, just like an accident, because I print lots of images anyway, just to put them on the wall, like stuff that I'm making, or reference images of pictures that I'm interested in, thinking if I have that around long enough, something might come of it. And because I print so many, inevitably, every kind of 100 prints, you get this kind of cyan, yellow, magenta indication that your ink has run out. You've got to put more yellow in there or something. And because I had a lot of these things lying around, they're like reject prints, and it's just like kind of a curious thing, because you get this very detailed, like 17th century painting, and then suddenly this very modernist stripes in there, and then just blank. And I was thinking, you know, what an artist does is that he kind of imitates the process of light. That light is white, it comes down, passes through a prism, and comes out in this all the colours of the spectrum, and the artist takes this white canvas and then he turns that through these colours into image. And it was a way of just making a kind of a slightly cheeky image about the fact that, you know, we never really know when we're going to die. We never really know when our printer's going to run out of ink. It's always just lurking there, and it's just kind of going to happen at some time, and suddenly the image expires.
The Banksy stole that idea from you recently. Did you
hear
hear
was quite similar, the one that he had, yeah.
Did you hear about this Banksy picture that got shredded? It reminded me of this idea here. But the choice of the images that you've got here, you know, those are very specifically about quite dark things again.
So I started off doing them with lots of different subjects, just kind of feeling my way around the idea. And then for some reason it was like, oh, well, this one works, this one works, this one, they don't work over there. And inevitably the ones that worked was because they all had shades of mortality in them. They were decapitated heads, or ships in peril, or cut flowers in a vase. And for some reason they worked. If they were kind of like, you know, paintings of impending doom, they appeared to work better than other more innocent imagery.
You really are a man, an artist who deals with darkness. And I have to say that the way the exhibition is installed sort of confirms that and enlarges it, because the building that you're in has got this huge glass wall, so it was originally some kind of greenhouse or some space for showing plants and trees with all this glass in it, but you've completely blocked all that off and created this dark world. That's a very ambitious thing to do, but also a very loaded thing to do.
Yeah, it doesn't make it any easier that I have to kind of be showing in spaces with no daylight in, because most galleries have the whole kind of objective is to have abundance of natural light. But I think one of the reasons that it works here in Spain is that it's something that I'm familiar with, particularly from the Baroque paintings that I like. And in a very bright country, you tend to get these kind of dark streets where you have like shadows, and then you plunge yourself into these shadows, and then suddenly the shadow is punctuated by this strong beam of light which comes through a crack or through a window somewhere. So that high contrast thing of light and colour being punched into darkness is something that I think you're familiar with just from walking around the streets of a place like Madrid.
It's very different from England, isn't it? The light in England tends to be much more sort of diffuse and grey, whereas in Spain there's like a fight going on with the sun sometimes in the summer.
Yeah.
You have these buildings with thick walls and tiny windows and people fighting against the sunlight, and it creates a different kind of blackness. So if you look at Goya's paintings, or there's so much sort of darkness of that kind, isn't there, in Spanish art, where the physical darkness becomes a kind of psychological darkness.
Yeah, I think there's a bit in Dickens when he talks about, what's the clocks, the time clock with the shadow, what do they call them?
Sundial.
Sundial kind of thing, right? He's talking about one on a street of London. This is because they're probably designed in like kind of Mediterranean somewhere. And then in England it just seems to mock the weather because there is no shadow, because there is no sun, and there is just this spike which is in an overcast country with no means of telling the time through it.
So there's a sense in which your blackness, which you use so much in your art, has been learnt from Spanish old masters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now let's talk about the most ambitious pieces in the old master section, which are these, there's a couple of amazing artworks called zoetropes, or based on zoetropes. Now, those of you who haven't seen them, when you go tomorrow, they are extraordinary pieces, just in terms of their ambition, their difficulty, their complication, amazing things. Now, tell us about those, because they are, I suppose, amongst your most famous works.
Well, there are ways of kind of demonstrating to people what it is when you're looking at animation and what's happening. And for me, the reason for making them became a little bit more urgent because everybody's on these all the time, and we've certainly got the means for live streaming, like a video show when we're on the bus or walking around. And the whole magic of what's happening when that thing appears is become invisible. It's all happening by these electrons that are flying through the air, and we just have like no kind of tangible relationship with them. Whereas with the zoetropes, you can kind of almost physically see what's happening with an animation in front of you. Basically what happens is it's based on the Victorian optical toy or optical apparatus called the zoetrope, which is a cylinder with little slots in, and you have like a series of images on the inside of the cylinder. As it turns around, you look through the slot, which works as a shutter, so you have this illusion of animation. Same principle, but I've made it in 3 dimensions, so instead of drawings or photographs, it's an actual physical form, and then as they rotate, I flash strobe lights at it, and the flashing is synchronized with the movement of the little characters. So you're getting lots of frames, but it's happening in 3 dimensions. So each little character that I have, each little physical thing, is slightly different movement of the human body, whatever it is. And on that principle, you can construct this animation. But you can kind of see it happening in front of your eyes. But if it's done right, it becomes very compelling to actually experience. So suddenly you're kind of engaged in this thing. And so the subjects I choose, I try to make them kind of sympathetic to what's going on technically. So there's one recreation of the Massacre of the Innocents, very famous subject matter for painters for hundreds of years. People really like to return to that, and I'm just interested in this.
There's loads
thing.
of babies being murdered. So there's like a temple, and you see it. At first, it looks as if nothing much is happening. Then it starts to spin, and all you see is babies being murdered. So it's very much about the story of Herod and what happened in Bethlehem after Christmas. Sorry to.
But there must be something in that story other than just like a kind of a lesson about Herod for it to have taken on such prevalence within like kind of painters' oeuvres and within museum collections. And apparently it was a very popular medieval history play. They would have pigs' bladders filled with blood inside their kind of shirts, and then they would stab them on stage in the first few rows of the audience, be soaked in blood, and people couldn't get enough of it. They loved it. I was like, what is that interest in experiencing these kind of barbarous acts as entertainment for me? And it kind of disturbed me, but a lot of the reading I did around it was that maybe it's not such an unhealthy thing, and that when violence occurs, the potential outcome is so dramatic that it really pays us to like kind of pay attention to it. So if there's a couple of guys fighting in a bar, we should maybe have a little look, because we might learn something. Or a couple of dogs fighting in the street. There's something about that which might be useful information when it all kind of kicks off. And so it's like an evolutionary, we're hardwired towards just paying attention to these things because it's like a survival mechanism. So rather than being unhealthy, to spend hours playing violent video games, going to bullfights, gladiatorial contests, it's actually like it taps into like a kind of a healthy human interest that it's just a means of survival.
Well, we're going to be asking some questions from the audience in a minute. The second zoetrope I just quickly wanted to deal with, if I may. Is that too late already? Have I talked too much already? But it's a chandelier, so it looks like a beautiful piece of art from Murano or Venice or something. But in this instance, everybody's getting drunk, aren't they? They're drinking, they're having fun, they're having a bacchanal. That's more my kind of idea of life.
Yeah, but it's because of the way that it's made. It's essentially you're looking at something that's a 1 second loop, and everything's repeated after that. So all the actions, which initially seem to be part of this carnivalesque party, it's kind of quite desperate because of the repetition. And when you kind of introduce that element of repetition into something like that, it starts becoming, you start getting a little bit edgy. It's like a little bit frayed and desperate, which ties into the eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. It's all going to be over soon. There's that little added layer of anxiety in the party.
Yeah. So if you want to be reminded that tomorrow you're going to die, you can all go and see Matt's wonderful, exciting exhibition next door. We're putting these on, are we? Is that the idea? And then listening to the audience, is that right? Okay. So.
Yeah.
She's got a microphone. Paloma, the translator can't hear your microphone. No. Can you hear now? No. No?
She can't hear. Now it's good. Yeah.
Come on, we've come all the way from England. You can't leave us just sitting here. You have to just ask me something or ask Matt about his wonderful show. And you all look like nature lovers as well.
Is that a question
to me or to Matt? To me, do I read?
No. You're a critic. So
Yes.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do read.
La abstención que sus padres hicieron con usted la han padecido otros niños de mi alrededor que no han estado en sectas. Sin embargo, el producto que usted ha sacado de esa abstención ha sido fabuloso. Es decir, si yo supiera que todos los niños que se abstienen de la abstención podrían generar un mundo tan fabuloso como el que usted ha imaginado, pensara que todos los niños dejaran de ver televisión. Eso no es el caso. El caso es que precisamente ustedes tuvieran ese ambiente y estuvieran creándose con cuestiones de la vida y ha producido en ustedes no me extraña que el crítico esté fascinado porque en usted ha producido un
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think when I first saw Bill Vaola's work, for me, that was like, okay, so this is a way of making the kind of thing that I want to make, because there is something in, like, when would it be, like, I guess maybe early 90s, late 80s when I first experienced them. And I hadn't really seen art which I thought had something which I could only describe as like a spiritual resonance to it. And of course, in a lot of the old masters here, you deal with the religious subject matter, so there is like the presence of God or angels, etc. 20th century, slightly different, but a lot of the artists came from or had certain spiritual awareness that they wanted to get in their work. Mondrian, for example, he was somebody, and he's part of a whole scene of trying to get, like, yeah, theosophy. And then also artists like Carl Andre or something, his works, they seem to have this almost semi-mystical presence to them, which some of minimal art does. And this kind of, I think the word spiritual seems to be so ambiguous, an excuse for not really knowing what you're talking about, but this kind of, this presence that the artists could inspire through their work was something interesting and something that I wanted to try to do in the work that I was making. And then seeing Bill Vaola, it was like, oh, so you can do it with video. And like, kind of, if you forget about that frame with the Sony logo on and just have it as a projection, or have it something that has the content, it can move you in a certain way, and it can have this quality to it. And in fact, video, particularly when it's projected, is like an extremely good medium for this, in the way that probably magic lanterns were, because essentially it's ephemeral. There's nothing there to really touch, and you've got this kind of very magical means for creating a presence. So Bill Vaola was like a kind of a turning point for me back when I first saw it.
There's a big Bill Vaola exhibition in London at the moment at the Royal Academy. It's Bill Vaola and Michelangelo together. So 12 huge video pieces by Bill Vaola and about 20 little drawings by Michelangelo. And the interesting game of table tennis between the two, backwards and forwards. It's
also an exhibition with not many windows.
No windows at all, yeah.
And totally blacked out.
That's right. Yes?
Thank you. I think like it was quite a special time, and like most things, it just happened quite organically, and there were a lot of different elements at play, and somehow there was a lot of cross-pollination, and things just snowballed. And I think for me and the friends that I was growing up with, who went to art school together and then like kind of messed around drinking afterwards, for that period of years, it was like being in a pressure cooker that everybody was feeding off everybody else's energy. And I think most of the people that I know from that period, they're all very bright, intelligent people, but they probably hadn't done very well at school. They weren't academically inclined, so they'd always had something within them, but they'd never been able to really use it because they weren't good at maths or English or Spanish or geography. And then suddenly, for the first time, when they arrived at this art school in London, where you had a lot of practicing artists who took what they said and thought and did seriously and discussed it like seriously, even if it was just like a kind of a pair of underpants kind of distilled in resin propped up on the floor. They were talking about it in a serious manner. So suddenly there was a forum for talking about this thing called art, and these people from these very diverse backgrounds came together to share this kind of crazy thing that you can just talk about anything and discuss whether it's art or not. And I think these kids, for the first time in their lives, they all had something that they'd been hungry for 20 years. And they were also kind of formed in the crucible of punk rock, this kind of explosion of music that happened in the late 70s, where suddenly you could just do it yourself. It's forget about everything that's gone on before. It's just about like making something that speaks about your situation, and you don't really need to be educated in music or anything else. So there's this kind of do-it-yourself aesthetic that nobody's going to give you a recording contract, nobody's going to kind of promote you, you've got to do it yourselves. And it was, I think, that attitude that was then put under this kind of the construct of conceptual art. So we learn what it is to kind of take an object and put it in a gallery and talk about it seriously and say, why is that art or why it isn't, etc. So they gave us this template which we could then kind of approach and analyze whatever it is that we were trying to make. So all of those different ingredients came together at a particular time and just created a very fertile atmosphere. But I don't think any of us were really looking for kind of success or kind of fame or money or any of those things. It was just like a hunger to try and make something that resonated with us. You know, we loved art history, but we wanted to make something about our situation, and that was what we really wanted to do. And it meant that we went to put on very professionally organized exhibitions, which, you know, we did all the work. We got a building, ripped it all out, cleaned it all up, put on the show, invitation, wine opening, tried to get the press down, this kind of stuff. But it wasn't, the end game wasn't trying to be successful. And then you had people like Charles Saatchi, who came on the scene, great collection he had, and he was buying work. And suddenly the whole kind of situation got a bit out of control, and I kind of am concerned that certain generations growing up now think that that's what it's all about. And I have been to art schools where there are young artists there, and it's like, how do you get a gallery? How do you get shown in a museum? How do you sell your work? As though that's the prime motivation for being it. And it seems like, well, you know, why don't you just concentrate on the work? But it's impossible to do that. You know, we were lucky that we were living in that time where everything kind of exploded. Tate Modern didn't exist at that time. Now it's the most popular tourist attraction in Britain. So many people go there, and the whole way of looking at art in England has changed over the last 30 years. People just weren't interested back in the 80s, and now it's just insanely popular. And how do you go into that as a young artist and approach it in a fresh way? I don't know, it's very difficult.
It was a rebellion, you know. I'm lucky enough to have been an art critic for that whole period. So when I started writing about art, I used to work for the Guardian newspaper. I remember a time when if you wrote contemporary art outside an art gallery, everybody would go in the other direction. You know, it was the most unpopular thing in England, particularly because of some of the issues that Matt raises in his Albion piece. You know, all those old people looking about the British Empire, remembering the past, they hated contemporary art. But then this generation changed that because they spoke directly to younger people, a younger audience, and also they were rebellious. You know, when you look back at art history and you look at those great moments when art really changed, like Cubism, when Cubism happened, or the Baroque era, when the Baroque happened, you know, you could feel a similar thing happening in England during the YBA. I'm not saying that they're the same quality of artists, although Matt is, yes. But the moment when, for some reason, 3 or 4 or 5 people get together and they share some kind of energy and the moment is right and something happens and it changes everything. You know, that happened in England, you know, and it was 10 years before Tate Modern, this generation began to turn the British audience into an audience that liked contemporary art. And it was magic. It was magic. Who would have believed that that could happen? But it did. It was a great moment for us.
And Waldemar was very much part of it because you were writing about it all the time and kind of making it accessible.
Well, it was happening in front of me, and I was so excited because a lot of the 80s art before you was so boring and so institutionalized, and it didn't have that visceral quality that your art had. You know, your art didn't, although it was based on conceptual ideas, it very rarely did it enter you through your ideas. It entered you through what you saw. You know, this English word visceral, I don't know what it is in Spanish, but it means when something, you know, approaches you through its kind of biological, its physical presence, and it excites you. And suddenly, art got colourful and bright and strong and dark and everything, and it became exciting. It's a great moment. But very few of that generation have gone on to become artists of stature who have had other phases and who have grown in, whose work has grown into a kind of mature, later style. It's one of the best things about Mat. I don't mind saying it even though he's here, but his art continues to develop, continues to grow, and his mature art is as good as his early art, and perhaps in some cases it's even better. And that's rare of this generation. Any more? Yes, there's a nice lady over here.
Hello, I saw your exhibition this morning, and I have to say it made me feel quite uneasy, in a good way, if that's possible. But it also made me wonder about a point where beauty and pain can be mistaken one for each other. And I was wondering now, listening to you and talking about beauty coming out of rabbits, out of their water, if you ever worked with that notion in mind, pain and beauty, or beauty and ugliness being the same thing.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for going. Thank you for your question. And yeah, of course, and places like this, the Prado Museum, is where that comes from, and that paradox of experiencing those two motions at the same time. When we opened the exhibition last week, we had a wander around after the museum was closed, which was like an exquisite moment, just being in the Prado without too many people in there. And one of the paintings we stopped in front of was a Roger van der Weyden, it's a deposition Christ being taken down from a cross. And it is grief in technicolor. Like the colors in that painting are so vivid and kind of modern in the way that their brightness and vibrancy and the flatness of those colors, but at the center of the painting is kind of Christ being taken down from the cross, and people are weeping, and there is anguish there, but there is this strange, beautiful harmony to the painting, and it's beautiful. So that's the paradox, and it happens in a lot of historical religious paintings. The crucifix generally, I mean, other than some examples like Grunwald's Crucifixion in Colmar, which is quite an anguished and ugly painting in a way. A lot of the kind of Spanish and Italian, French paintings are really very sensual and beauty. So you're looking at a crucifixion which is an image of torture, but presented to you in this sublime manner. And that's something that's always kind of troubled and disturbed and interests me.
That Van der Weyden, the Descent from the Cross, I mean, somebody once counted 100 different types of tear.
Wow.
In it, 100 different types. And the thing I like is, you know, the position of Christ. He's got his arms like that and his body. But apparently, because the painting was paid for by the Crossbowmen's Guild, so he's in the shape of a crossbow. Mm-hmm. And there's actually little crossbows in the corners. If you look, there are these kind of crossbows, because it was like the Guild of the Crossbowmen commissioned the picture.
Product placement.
Yeah. That looks like it's grinding to a halt.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation. It was really fascinating for me. I saw your exhibition, and when I entered, I felt like her. I was seduced beauty of death, such a way. So this was what I felt. For me, it was not unpleasant. For me, it was something that touches me. Also, the first impression was, also I thought about vídeo, but I forgot it immediately because I entered in a different state. I don't know how to explain. So I entered in this world that was at the same time fantastic, I don't know, fancy. I drank. Then I arrived to the little bird, and I thought, oh my God, this is how really I feel. I feel like this bird under the crystal ball.
Trapped.
Breathing his last air and then dying again. So this is what I felt. And then when I saw the other part, there was also that, but there was also a lot of irony, much more irony. For me, were fantastic the idea of the old painting considered like a photocopy. It was very funny. And sad also the funny at the same time. Also the food, the bodegon was very the same concept to me. And then I was surprised because I saw the two moving sculptures, and I had the possibility to see another one in Rome. The one with flowers, Centrifugal Soul.
Yes.
And I found, in this one, I cannot see the sense of death. Is it possible? It was like touching other.
In the flower, the one with flowers.
Yes, the flowers.
Yeah.
In fact, the flowers were completely different. The feeling. It was just something aesthetical for me. All the other work was so touching that I say, oh my God, there is a meeting with the artist. I want to be there. Yes or yes. So that's why I'm here, because your work is really touching. Your work in the Botanic Garden is really touching for me.
Thank you very much. The one with the flowers and the birds, Centrifugal Soul, it isn't really to do with death. It's something else, but I don't think we really need to go into it. It's to do with evolutionary behaviorism, kind of the struggle to survive, to breed, to procreate. But anyway, it's not like the beauty of death, I don't think. I've been asked to direct Fauré's Requiem, which is something I'm interested in doing. But Fauré, in his Requiem, it's all about him talking about the sweet embrace of death and the beauty of it all. Me, I'd like to have a little bit more resistance in there. So when you get the darkness in like Mozart's Requiem, for example, I could work a little bit more with that. Like, things are going to get pretty bad. To have something that's just this sublime acceptance of death, and which is also how Fauré talks about it, is quite a difficult one for me to make something for, because it's not really the way I think about it. So I have to add some gristle into this Fauré's Requiem that I'm doing, because for me, like, death isn't a beautiful thing.
It's not beautiful, but it's real, so we're dying in such a way. So, I don't know. And I have a question for Waldemar.
I love your hat. I love your hat. It's beautiful. No.
I would like to know your opinion, which is now the center of art, because we have had Paris, we have had New York, we have had Japan. I don't know now what is the center of art, or which is your opinion? Perhaps it's everywhere because of the social media.
Yeah, I think so. I think the most important topic or concern of art at the moment is what they call identity. The Venice Biennale will be on this year, as you know, this great exhibition of contemporary art in Venice. And I know that a lot of artists there will be involving themselves with these various issues of identity. And of course, because of the social media world we're living in, and because of the technological global reach of art, everywhere can be part of contemporary art today. So if you go and see an exhibition in Mozambique, or you go and see an exhibition in Egypt, or you go and see an exhibition in England, actually, it's amazing, there's a kind of Esperanto of contemporary art that everybody's speaking the same kind of thing. And 20 years ago, when you went to the Afghanistan pavilion in the Venice Biennale or at Documenta, you would see someone making art with carpets, or, you know, now they'll be making art like Mat Collishaw, you know, they'll be making video art or him. So I think that sense of a place being the place where art has, as it were, received the baton in the kind of relay race of art, I think that has changed in the modern world. Having said that, there is a lot of interest now in places, you know, there's a lot of African art that's being discussed, a lot of Middle Eastern art. So a lot of non-Western artistic traditions are being explored and examined, which I think is great and really exciting. And it can teach us things as well, teach us so much. But I would be very surprised if there was ever another moment, you know, like in New York in the 1950s or in Paris in the 1910s, when you feel that a lot of the art energy of the world is in one place and that 10 people are kind of doing something. For me, I think perhaps those days are over. We're into a kind of more global art situation with this whole idea of identity. We all want someone to listen to us. He does, I do, you do. You know, we all come and we all want to wave a flag and say, look at me, I'm over here. This is about my identity. And that's certainly what is happening a lot in art at the moment.
Muchas gracias, Mat, muchas gracias, Waldemar, por compartir con nosotros tantas ideas interesantes, tantas emociones. Gracias a nuestro público por compartir su tiempo con nosotros. Ha sido un placer y espero que, bueno, pues este tipo de ocasiones en el Prado se puede hablar de arte contemporáneo y yo creo que esta ha sido una buena muestra. Muchas gracias.
Thank you to the Fundació Sorigué for supporting one of our